There are many reasons that people would want to take the Camino. Some of these reasons are related to having read one of the books on the Camino. One that comes to mind is the Shirley MacLaine book. And as a matter of fact, when I was traveling on the Camino, I found quite a few people who had read her book, and even some who were reading it while they were doing the tour. That particular book is somewhat metaphysical, but it's definitely a fun read. The one that I like is The Way is Made by Walking. Arthur Paul Boers has an incredible take on what it takes to walk the Camino. The book written by Jane Christmas from Canada is What the Psychic Told the Pilgrim. Now that sounds like there's some kind of a psychic metaphysical part in this, but it isn't. It's all about Jane Christmas and deciding that she's going to go on this pilgrimage somewhat as a, how would you call it, a midlife crisis. But her mistake was she decided that she was going to have a group of other women go on it. It is absolutely a hilarious read and worth looking at. The Pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho is, again, on the lines of the Shirley MacLaine book. It's, you could say, metaphysical, spiritual, and again, a good read. And I'm not saying any of those things are going to happen to you on the trip, but that might be another reason you might be going on it. Another reason would be maybe you've read the book on Santiago, the Pilgrimage Road, and this one gives the history. Now, if you have read this one, then you're going to want to take your time and you want to savor in all of the aspects of the trip. When I said there's many reasons, when we talked to this lady, I think her reason was to find a man. That may be a reason, it may not be, but in this particular case, that's what she was after. Some people do it for spiritual reasons, and they want to visit the churches, and they want to feel the essence of what this trip was all about. Sometimes people do it because it's an athletic event. They want to feel the exhilaration of hiking through the mountains. They want to feel that as they travel through the trip. If you're going on the spiritual part, or even if you're just going on the athletic part, it's important that you get your credentials signed. We got our credentials signed, and Ron Savalier's, Patricia on the left and myself on the right, getting our credentials signed. What we did then is made sure that we got the credentials stamped at every hostel along the way, as well as every bar that we went to. A lot of young people on the tour, and when they go on the tour, they go to have a good time. I particularly enjoyed the good time that my friends were having as we sat there having a picnic and a little glass of wine. What a fun time. Ricardo, my man from Brazil with Patricia, he had started in France, and he said that was horrendous. And his reason, it's hard to say, but it was more the idea that he'd been in a bureaucratic job and he wanted to get out of that and experience life outside of Brazil. Many different reasons as to why people are on this trip. Might be Ricardo on the right, looking for spiritual enlightenment. On the left, the young lady, or not young lady, middle to older lady from Germany, and she was overcoming cancer and was back on the trip to experience what that was all about. The people that I liked most were Freddie and his team. Now, Freddie would go ahead in his Audi, and he would set up the picnic, and then the boys would come hiking in, and he would have the wine, and they'd be all ready. Look at that. They've all got their cups out ready. Two ladies who had retired from being stewardesses were out there recovering from a life in a bureaucratic type job, and now out into the I guess you could say semi-wilderness. Many different reasons as to why people are traveling on the Camino. Rory and Patsy and the stewardesses would meet with us in the evening, and Rory, as you can see, Rory, the slightly balding-headed fellow, was his third time on it, and he'd had a hip replacement, but he was bound and determined he was going to do it. Patsy, his wife, is moving along at a nice pace. And what was most interesting about Patsy is no matter how early Patricia and I got out ahead of them, Patsy would always seem to catch up with us. My good friend Boyan from Slovenia was in a searching mode. He was looking for what did life really mean, and he was also preparing an incredible documentary of his trip. And it's not everywhere you're going to go that you're going to find somebody sitting there with their Apple laptop, or in the evening you would see them checking out their email or finding out what was going on back home. Not highly recommended, but certainly something that you can do on the trip, because pretty well all of the places have internet access. There was a group from the French Basque area, and they were preparing a CD. They were practicing because when they got back home, they were going to create a CD. And everywhere we would go, there they would be, either in a church or having dinner, and having dinner practicing their songs. I mean, to meet the people on the Camino and to find out their many different reasons was one of the joys of being on the Camino. Two young ladies, no, they're not all by themselves, 8 years old and 10 years old. They have a mother and a father who have just ahead, and a 78-year-old grandmother as part of the tour. There were many young people on the tour. These young people were doing a month and a half of just get away, totally away from the life that they'd led. In some cases, one lady was from Los Angeles and worked on one of the movies there. And Mr. An, he was retired, 65 years old, and his children said he couldn't do it. And he was out there, well, he was a slack packer, so he could send his backpack ahead. When he'd send his backpack ahead, he could then pick it up at the next spot. There was one gentleman on there, and I didn't get his name, but he'd come all the way from England, from England, and he had a trailer hooked up to his waist, and he was just moving along at an incredible pace and just nice and gentle. Ricardo from Barcelona had come to the end of his trip. This was it for him. And I asked him, I said, what do you do? He said, well, he just retired as a civil engineer. And it was at that point that I couldn't fully understand how he could have a backpack that was so poorly organized if he'd been a civil engineer. Another lady we met on the trip had come from the Netherlands and had taken her bike trip. She was recovering from breast cancer. Some people who are from Spain are prepared to go out on the trip, and they would just go out for a day or maybe 3 or 4 days, and they would move their car ahead, and then their buddy would hike back to them, and they always had a car with them, and one buddy would go ahead with the car and then hike back and meet them, then they'd move ahead to their next spot. And that's a way of doing it if you happen to live in Spain or France. You just go out for a long weekend. Many reasons for being on the tour. Everybody has their reasons. Sometimes it's a spiritual reason, and sometimes it's a health reason. Sometimes it's something that you just need to do that's in you. Patricia found that her backpack was a little heavy, not much, and so she sent many of her clothes home, and that meant that she would have to get out in the morning and just wrap herself up with her sleeping bag to keep nice and warm. You'll find that there are many people out on the trail who have just been let out of a big bus, and they're just hiking along, and they're doing the trail maybe 10, 15 kilometers a day, and they're picking up a little bit, and the bus picks them up and takes them to the next spot. We met people from Africa, from Slovenia, from around the world, and that's the joy of being on the Camino. Two incredibly interesting gentlemen were the two from England, from London, both lawyers, father and son. They were both there helping each other possibly overcome the adult beverage program. Well, if you want to overcome the adult beverage program, I'm not sure that the Camino is the place to go. They did learn, though, that if you're going to be on the Camino, you really have to look after your feet.